Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today is April 8th. April 8th on the Western calendar is considered Buddha's birthday. So happy birthday, everybody. It's very interesting. Technically, in Asia, Buddha's birthday is the 8th day of the 4th month, which is why I think what happened in Japan when they switched to the Western calendar in the 1870s, the 4th day of the 8th month on the lunar calendar became April 8th in Japan. And I believe that's why we celebrate Buddha's birthday on April 8th. But in Asia and other places from Japan, they don't celebrate Buddha's birthday today. In Korea, it's sometime in May, and that's probably true in China and Tibet and Southeast Asia also. So happy birthday, today is Buddha's birthday, but today isn't really Buddha's birthday. But then again, every day is Buddha's birthday. In fact, every moment is Buddha's birthday, and everything is being continually reborn, just now. So, if we make the idea of Buddha's birthday, the implication is that someday is not Buddha's birthday. So that's what we call opposites thinking. It's either Buddha's birthday or it's not Buddha's birthday. But that's just our thinking. So, since we're Zen practitioners, we have to ask deeply the question, if Buddha's birthday is just something that's created by mind, if you take away mind, where do you find Buddha's birthday? Maybe a better question is, if you take away mind, where do you find Buddha? Someone asked Zen Master Ma Zhou, what is Buddha? He said, mind is Buddha. Before thinking, what is mind? Look in front of you. The Buddha is already shining. If you make something, you create yes and no. But Buddhism isn't about dualistic thinking. Buddhism points us back to the absolute. But even the absolute is not enough. Buddha brings us, Zen and Buddha and Buddhism bring us back to this moment. What is it? And how do we respond? In this moment, Buddha becomes alive. What can you do? Each circumstance creates the response. We get in trouble when we add mind, thinking mind. Obsessively lost and stuck in our opposites mind. Then we don't know what to do. But if we can cut off that mind, the truth appears right in front of us. And then it's our job to respond. So our teaching says, when someone's hungry, give them food. When someone's thirsty, give them drink. When we're tired, sleep. How many of us spend our nights tired and not sleeping? Because we're stuck in opposites thinking. So our training is to help us let go of opposites thinking enough to be able to see clearly what's actually going on and organically and naturally respond to the situation. But be careful, because thinking isn't even the problem. In fact, our thinking is quite valuable. The problem is obsessive thinking. The problem is attachment to dualistic thinking. It gets very confusing. Zen Master Sung San used to always talk about before thinking mind. Just do it. So one day at a ceremony in Providence, Rhode Island, just as the ceremony began, he pointed to me and said, "You videotape." Okay, he said to do it, so I did it. It wasn't just a videotape on a tripod. They handed me a camera and said, "Videotape." Okay, so I start doing it. And then, I don't know, maybe a third of the way into the ceremony, suddenly I hear Zen Master Sung San's voice bellowing out, "You have to plan." You have to plan, but before thinking. How does that fit? It fits if it's not about right or wrong. Thinking is this amazing gift that we humans have. Our problem is maybe in a sense you can say, is over-reliance on our thinking. But giving up our thinking isn't the answer either. What the Buddha taught was the middle way. Not too tight, not too loose. And it can be very frustrating for us because we like simple answers. Yes or no. Do it or don't do it. I was working with somebody this week and they were talking about their difficulty with alcohol. And the person really doesn't drink that much, so it's not really an alcoholic issue. And as we were talking, it became clear that just saying no, or even just saying yes, was the easy way to go. The hard way to go is to be aware. What is the situation right now? What are the triggers that get me into trouble? And then to act accordingly. So really it's sometimes yes, sometimes no. But there's no one answer that you can rely on. So that creates some anxiety for us. And in some ways our response to anxiety can be overthinking, obsessiveness, worry, confusion in our thinking. So then we get attracted to the idea of take away my thinking, then no problem. But take away our thinking, then we're like a rock or a stone. There's a story in Zen Master Sung San's book, Dropping Ashes on the Buddha. And it's about the monk in Korea in the olden times who they called Rock's Head. Rock's Head, they say, was a very, very stupid monk. But in this case, what they mean by stupid is he was illiterate. Obviously, there's a very big difference. But they called him Rock's Head. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, and he thought of himself as stupid. So he never asked the Zen master any questions because he couldn't even think of a question to ask. So his fellow monks, probably the head monk, started to push him. Go ask the Zen master a question. Go ask him a question. He said, I have no question. I don't even know how to ask a question. But the head monk pushed him, so finally he says, okay, I have a question. What is Buddha? So we went to the Zen master, and he asked the Zen master the question, what is Buddha? So the Zen master responded in Korean, Buddha is mind. But Roxhead didn't hear very clearly. And apparently in Korean, these two lines are very close. I just don't remember the mistake that the monk made. But he heard, Buddha is grass shoes. And apparently the language is very close. So the Buddha said, the Zen master says, Buddha is grass shoes. What does that mean? So Roxhead took this as a koan. Those of you who understand our practice form, we use these difficult, some say unanswerable questions to investigate our life. So he sat for 3 years with this question, what does Buddha is grass shoes mean? So not only did he misunderstand the teacher, but he made up a crazy question. Actually, it's not quite so crazy, but leave that aside. He heard wrong, and then he took the wrong information, and he made it the basis of his practice. For 3 years, sitting in meditation, Buddha's grass shoes. You know, we say, breathe in, what am I? Breathe out, don't know. So he would breathe in, what is Buddha? Grass shoes. What does that mean? Crazy. So, but he held that question. He was so sincere. And in a way, he was lucky. He wasn't an intellectual. He wasn't lost in the trappings of distinguishing things in mind. But he was curious. What is the meaning of Buddha as grass shoes? So the story goes, one day he was in the hills collecting firewood. And as he was walking, his grass shoe, which they wore in Korea at that time, broke. And somehow it flew off of his foot and it hit him in the head. And when it hit him in the head, he got enlightenment. Ah, Buddha's grass shoes. Now I understand. And he understood himself. So we went running back to the teacher. Said, Zen Master, I understand. Zen Master says, what do you understand? He says, Buddha is grass shoes. Zen Master says, what does that mean, Buddha is grass shoes? He takes his shoe and he whacks the Zen Master on the head with the grass shoes. And then they both start clapping and laughing because they understood. So even a mistake in our thinking can open us to the truth. This is hard practice. But sometimes we get stuck and we misunderstand, or we get lost in self-doubt, confusion, not understanding. And we don't like that. We want that to go away. But if we go into it and experience it and use it for our practice, that's a help to help us wake up. So even though we don't like something, it still can be very valuable in our awakening. And by awakening, I mean our presence and aliveness in this moment. So even if we make a big mistake, that mistake can help us wake up. We like to get it right. We like everyone to tell us that we're a good person, or that we're very smart, or that we're very aware, or that we're very, very compassionate and helpful. But sometimes when we get that kind of feedback, we kind of feel good about ourselves. And then actually, that takes us farther away from the truth, because we get stuck in our own egoic sense of I. But sometimes that mistake, that moment where people say, no, you're wrong. Or maybe even worse, no, I don't trust you. You dropped the ball when we needed you to hold it. We can take that moment and investigate ourselves and wake up. In some ways, we need those moments because they knock the blocks out from underneath us. And when we go into free fall, we have some experience of what it truly is to be alive, unbolstered by that egoic puffing up that we do all the time. So I'm not suggesting that you should seek out people to vilify you or actually do stupid things, which will bring on condemnation. But we do it once in a while, don't we? We fuck up. But we can take that fuck up and wake up. What we usually do is start piling on and making things worse and worse and worse. Okay, if that's where your mind goes, that's where it goes. But at any moment, we can turn it around. If we say something, let's say we say our thinking is a problem, thinking about our thinking can magnify the problem. Thinking about it can magnify it even worse. And then we get stuck in this kind of spiral. But at any moment, it's possible to hear the sound and stop and ask, what am I? And in that moment of asking and dropping all our preconceptions and just listening, just seeing, just smelling, just experiencing, we can wake up to the reality of our own true nature. So I want to make one more point and then I'll open to some questions. And this is a little bit of a side jump, but it's on the same topic. We all know that we're in the midst of this drought, and there's talk about cutting back on our water consumption. And as I've been reading things online, there's a lot of talk these days about the water it takes in agriculture in California. And there was a beautiful chart that I saw today on how much water it takes to make an ounce of food. And I think the biggest one was beef. It takes like 106 gallons of water to make 1 ounce of beef. The average per capita water use per day in the Bay Area is something on the order of 50 gallons. So it takes 2 people's water for 1 day to make 1 ounce of that steak or hamburger or whatever else you do with your beef. I'm not even suggesting you don't eat beef, but it's interesting. But it takes 40 gallons of water to make 1 almond. I think I read that 70% of the water in California that the farmers use goes to almond production. No, that's probably not exactly right. But I believe the statistic is 70% of our almonds are shipped out of the country. So essentially, we're taking our water and shipping it out of the country. But I'm not even saying this to make that good or bad. It's just the way it is. And as I was showering this morning, thinking about my water use, I was thinking how water is actually food. Water is beef. Beef actually is water. And avocados, and I think chickpeas take about 70 gallons for 1 ounce of chickpeas. So it's not just meat production that's bad. maybe it's 40 gallons for one avocado. So we think water is water and food is food. But water is food. Food is water. And then, if I'm right, from my childhood, I remember we're about 95% water. So water is me. Me is water. But if water is me, and water is also beef, and water is also trees, and water is also cotton, we're all water. Everything, not just water, everything is completely interconnected. One of the basic teachings that the Buddha gave was called co-arising interdependence. Everything is everything else. And not only I am the tree, I am you. If we're all water, what really is the difference? Here is where the difference comes. In our thinking, in our idea. Now, of course, I'm sitting here, you're sitting there. That's also true. But it's not limited to that. I'll go one more step and then I should shut up. I'm going to go too far. But I'm going to say it anyway. We have this term in Buddhism called emptiness. And those of you who've heard me talk over the years know I don't really like the word emptiness. I don't think it really says what it means. But what occurred to me is that what the Buddha realized, and probably not just the Buddha, but all the ancients, the wisdom in the ancients, they realized that the world isn't what we thought it was. Nowadays we have science that actually tells us the same thing. But their science at those times was what we would call primitive. So maybe they didn't understand what things actually were the way we think we understand it, and probably a few hundred years from now they're going to laugh at our understandings. But they had some insight that just because something appeared to be, it didn't mean it was. And that we call great doubt. So I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I've watched this TV show called Brain Games. And on the first episode, but then I saw an episode on the plane as I was traveling to the East Coast. And I kind of missed it, but they seem to be pointing out what's kind of obvious, which is our perception of things is not the thing itself. 3 people over there are leaning up against a wall. Those of us sitting over here see a white wall behind them. But the wall that we see is not the wall that's there. It's just our perception that creates the image of that wall. I mean, in a very simplistic way, we know that there are atoms lined up in some kind of pattern that gives the impression of solidity that our consciousness makes into a wall. But it's not what we think it is. The whole world is not what we think it is. That can be frightening. It can also be liberating. Because if we accept the fact that our perceptions are created by the human brain, and that brain puts things together in a particular way, in an evolutionary way that actually is valuable for our human existence. But it's not the thing itself. And if we can just hold that, it opens opens up some doubt. And once we open up doubt, we make room for wisdom and we make room for compassion. So just to use this teaching, and I think the Buddha and the people of his time knew this. They didn't know what it was, but they had some insight into just because we think it's a particular way or a particular thing, it doesn't mean that that is actually what it is. And we can use that doubt to help us. This is a strange juxtaposition I just made in my mind. But if you've seen the news today, there's this video of a policeman shooting an African-American man who's running away from him. And by the time he shoots him, the guy's at least as far away as the door. And then the video shows the cop doing things to cover his tracks, to blame it on the victim. Fortunately, a bystander was videotaping the whole thing, and the guy's been indicted for murder. The connection is the need for doubt. Our prejudices, our ideas, our beliefs about things put us in this box, and the stronger that we believe them, the more distant from reality I think we become. So if you go into a situation thinking a person of color is a risk, then you're going to respond as if that's true. If you believe my ideas are right, you're going to act as if your ideas are right. And if you just look around, the world's a mess. So our ideas are probably not right. And it's not just your ideas. My ideas are okay, but your ideas are the problem. The problem is all of us. It's human nature. So we practice, in a sense, to help open us up so that we're not stuck in that human tendency to get closed down and shut in to our ideas, beliefs, and opinions. But that we can raise some doubt and be open and actually listen, taste, and smell, and look, and actually experience closer at least to what is, not shaped so much by our beliefs, ideas, opinions, and conditions. Okay. Very much. Questions? Comments? I push anybody's buttons that you need to push back?
So, a common piece of advice in our culture to someone who is either young or somehow under duress, and the advice usually comes from someone older, more experienced, is keep your head on your shoulders, or think with your own head, or use your own mind, stuff like that. So, in light of all what we were saying about thinking, how does that advice apply to someone who practices Zen? Or is it not even applicable?
Well, so much of what we know, believe, and direct ourselves with are somebody else's ideas. We're constantly acting on things that we really don't know independently. So for a Zen practitioner to use your own mind, I think a better way we'd say it is use your own experience. Don't believe it just because I say it. The Buddha, his last teaching was be a light unto yourself. You find out. He always said, as far as I know, I wasn't there, here's what I'm saying. You check it out. You decide. Don't do it because I say it. You decide. Find out for yourself. Our culture doesn't really encourage that. Our culture really encourages, I'm telling you, believe me. But Zen turns that all around. Listen, take it seriously, be respectful, but then check it out. You find out for yourself. Keep great doubt, even when somebody else is telling you something. Be respectful, listen, really listen, and then find out for yourself. Okay? Julie?
You brought up the drought, and that is a really challenging one for me. I feel like I kind of attribute some of my problems to Zen. Because, when you practice, you get kind of more sensitized to your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm acutely aware of my water use. I would say like about 100 times more than most people around me, and including my partner. And, it's like we take a shower, I always have a bucket, so like the bowl catches the water before it turns hot.
Mm-hmm.
And then I leave it there sometimes, and then he'll take a shower without, and I get so pissed off. And I get pissed off with my students when they tell me they take 20-minute showers. I'm like, have you fucking read the news? Like, wake up. So for me, like, it's really, it's an interesting practice. Or I was at a class, dance class next door. There's a used car lot, and the guy's like spraying all this water on the cars, which are already clean. And I'm like, I'm gonna report that fucker. And so I just have to, it is an interesting practice for me, because I have to sort of really sit with that anger that comes up. And just be like, this is not gonna help anybody. Like, maybe I do need to report the guy, but I don't need to, like, the anger itself is, I know it's energy, but, so it's not really a question, but it's just an interesting thing to work with at the moment, because it really is bringing up, and then, I'm sure that, you mentioned almonds, I eat a lot of almonds, I'm like, oh, so there you go, like, I'm part of the problem too.
Right. I saw somebody said, don't cut down the times of your showers, just eat a few less almonds.
Right, and one less almond.
But if you eat less almonds, they're just going to sell it to somebody else.
Right, so it's just very interesting. It's a really...
But I think more to the point, Julie, is because that anger is arising, there's two things to say. One, you can use that anger probably to get pissed at the car dealer next door. That's not going to help too much.
Right.
But in a healthy way, you might be able to help your partner use a little less water.
Yeah, I did.
Not if you blast them, but if you transmute that anger into love, and you also get, but the other side is this anger now you get to work with. You can use it, but you can also be curious about it. And what was that?
That'd be good, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because it probably isn't just about water. That anger probably impacts your life in so many ways. The drought is helping you see it because it's so clear. So use the opportunity. On the one hand, really use it to help the drought. On the other hand, use it to help your practice. It's all just for the mill.
It's all just for the mill?
Yeah. Karen?
I attended a Tibetan retreat this weekend, 2 lamas on 59 points of mindfulness. And I think the most powerful moment for me during the whole time was when one of them was talking about the basics of Buddhism. We want something and we get it, and then we want something more, or we don't want something and we push it away. And then she said, but the most, I can't remember what you use, but the most powerfully damaging is ignorance. And I've always heard the emphasis on wanting or pushing.
Greed and anger. Yeah, the three poisons: greed, anger, and ignorance.
And when you were just talking about, look around the world. I mean, I read the paper with horror. I realize it's that third poison that's really, and we don't know what we don't know. I came out appreciating don't know so much.
Right.
Putting the emphasis on that third poison when I always heard it on the
Right. And also, in addition to what you're saying, sometimes that word ignorance is translated as delusion. And it seems to me a lot of our delusion are the stories we have to manufacture to cover up for our greed and anger.
Right.
Because we want to feel okay about ourselves. So we have to skew everything in order to make it be okay. So, and then we just keep doing that same thing over and over again.
One of the wellness said that a teacher here in San Francisco always says ignorance rather than ignorance. And she said, thought to herself after 15 years, how come he hasn't learned it, the pronunciation? And then she started thinking about ignorance.
Yeah.
And
That's the opposite of mindfulness.
yes.
I have to admit, when you first started talking about the retreat with the two lamas, I had the image of these two animals sitting up in front of the room. It might have been a less talk, but maybe more direct. I don't know. Peter?
I was thinking about, in terms of denial of the operating things that go on in the world, and that how many guidebooks have been written by people about situations that are supposed to be representations of what to avoid in the future. Okay, so you have this kind of roadmap of this is what happened when Athens attacked Corcyra, or going back and forth. And so you have a historian who writes a book so that people won't have to go through the same kind of power struggle process. But he says that human nature being what it is, that this is probably going to continue on. And it has. Despite all the wise people and all this kind of stuff, each generation seems to forget and has to discover it all over again every single time. Each generation has to completely, blindly stumble through it. So that kind of denial of any kind of historicity, or that I'm different. Everybody else is corrupted by power, but if I were in control, I wouldn't be corrupted by power. Bullshit. So anyway, that's my thing is that is there any hope for humanity that doesn't seem to see through that denial?
To me, I think practice is about that. The question is, it's like, I'm changing your question a little bit, but how do we work with denial? First thing I think is to admit it. In a sense, our practice is about deconstructing that denial. But unless we investigate, unless we stop the ignorance and bring mindfulness to it, we just keep repeating it. Because what the Buddha taught is we're stuck with the greed and the anger. That's human nature. And in a sense, we have to get underneath that to be able to do anything differently. And I think that's why we sit in this room for so many hours, just raising great doubt, to be able to deal with the truth rather than denying it. That denial is so powerful because it justifies my behavior. If I deny it and I pretend that it's okay, then I can keep doing it. You have a question?
I think it's really along the same lines.
Speak a little louder, my ears are clogged.
I think it's along the same line as my question, but it has has to do with the story you mentioned in South Carolina. And I seem to get very passionate or angry about social injustice or social inequality that goes on. And I know that that's not really helping anything, you know, by getting angry or getting very passionate. But also I don't want to feel like I'm just being apathetic also.
Right.
So I just thought maybe you could speak to that too.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree that getting angry and passionate doesn't help. It may. It depends what you do with that. If you can transmute that anger and passion into some action, some behavior, some... You know, when I'm saying this already, I can see in my mind it goes into big action. But just in our everyday life, these things happen. I mean, it's not as necessarily big as a man being shot in the back by a police officer. But at work, we all witness injustice. And do we have the courage to speak up? I know for myself, sometimes the worst things that I do are out of ignorance. That's not exactly what I meant. Are out of that I'm acting in a way that I'm not aware. My intention, generally speaking, I'm fairly confident that I'm not intending to hurt. But I do sometimes. And sometimes it takes somebody else to take that anger and passion and turn it to a way that can bring it to my attention in a way that I can hear it. So the challenge is not to get lost in the anger and passion or just use it for a feeling of self-righteousness, but to take that energy and make it alive in a way that helps. If you don't have the passion, you won't do anything. You know, when I first became a teacher in our school, the four vows, the second of the four vows that we say every morning in morning practice, we say now, delusions are endless, we vow to cut through them all. When I became a teacher, we were saying passions are endless. Passions are endless, I vow to end them all, something like that. And the first meeting I went to, I said, why are we saying that? Are we really looking to make ourselves passionless? And the other teachers must have had some kind of feeling about this because everybody went along. It was very easy. It took a while to find the right word. We have somebody who understands Chinese. He went back to the Chinese and pulled up the word delusion, which I was happy about because in some Zen groups, the word is desire. And even that, I think, is a problem. Desire can very much be a problem. Desire, if we think of it in terms of greed. But desire can also move us forward and impel us into action. So delusions, I thought, was a good word. Leaving that aside, the important thing was we decided not to make passion a bad thing. But it is very powerful. So we have to find a way to use it that it doesn't strangle us and the situation we're dealing with. Because we can get overwhelmed with our anger or our passion and then act in ways that actually give us the opposite result of what we're looking for. But if we can take that anger and that passion and digest it and use it, we can actually make things better. So, I don't think it helps to practice in a way that we're trying to fight ourselves. We want to find a way to join with our nature and use that with wisdom, love, and compassion.